Hey, it's Joel. I want to give you a quick heads up. In this episode, we use some explicit language. Listener discretion is advised. Hi, welcome back to the Personality Hacker Podcast. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge. Oh my gosh.
That was great. Your voice was like super weak when you just did your intro. You're like, I'm Antonia Dodge. Just like whispered through it, like a whisper scream.
Normally, we would go back and we would redo that all over again, but I don't think I'm going to come up with a better one the second time through.
Yeah.
Like you can hear in my voice my life circumstances.
Yeah. We just finished a workshop with Dr. Dario Nardi, like a 3-4 hour workshop. And every time you would speak up, your voice would waver. You almost sounded like you were on the verge of tears or like you had a frog in your throat. And your physicality is bearing out what's going on for you.
It's really, it's a very odd thing to be in a person who has almost defined themselves by an assertive tone and a very direct way of speaking and an authority. Like, I don't even understand the authority I carry in my voice because it's just something that I think is it's relatively natural for me. It's not really a quality I had to do a lot of development around. And I've lost authority in my voice. And a few weeks ago, I sent out an email that talked about how I've been struggling to podcast. I called it podcaster block, almost like writer's block. And it started out with just not being sure of what to say or how to say it. And having it just be really complicated to do what has always come naturally to me before. And that was the beginning of something that ended up turning into what may be the most intense time period of it's very much a dark night of the soul that I'm going through and experiencing. And it's changed my physicality. It's like changed the tenor in my voice being in this space. And so as opposed to just continually and perpetually not recording podcasts and just having them just sort of like stack up and stack up and stack up, because we've been recording podcasts for years. And, you know, like sometimes we miss a week here or there or late, and then we've had to backdate them. But we've never just missed for a super long time without any plan of being able to podcast again. This is literally the first time that you and I have both been a little concerned and worried about my capacity to record. And I thought, man, either we just give up the ghost and we say, okay, well, that's it. The podcast is over. or we just record one and I just do the thing that I've almost started to dread, which is get up to this microphone. And so today's podcast is going to be a little, it's going to be really self-referencing. It's going to be very much about me and my circumstances and situation and the things that I've learned from it. And I'm very insecure talking about myself. Like a few years ago or a couple of years ago, we did a podcast where I talked about my experiences with my parents, which was a very personal series of podcasts where there was just really 2 of them. And that was because I hoped it would really be helpful to other people. But it's still really difficult for me to talk about myself because my assumption is that nobody really, like there's nothing really that interesting about me. There's things that are interesting about maybe the content I've learned and some of the models I've learned and information I dispense. But I don't feel like intrinsically I'm an interesting person. So to personalize things is difficult for me. And I think in some respects, if I'm going to weave that into typology, it's because introverted feeling or authenticity, arguably one of the most personal of all the functions, is my 7th function. It falls way, 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 way down my stack. And so to me, talking about personal things, it's just not something that I'm naturally given to. And yet in this time period, this dark night of the soul, that seventh function, that introverted feeling or authenticity. It's where I'm living right now. And it's a very odd place for me to be. And it's honestly changing it's changed the quality of my voice. And this is just how I sound now. Like, I don't know what's going to happen if it doesn't go back. And this might be how I sound for a while. Is it just, like, am I wrong? Can you hear the difference in the quality of my voice?
Oh, yeah, of course. And, I've known you for a long time now, over a decade, and I've never known you to be one without words or the ability to just speak forth, when something comes to your mind. It's a unique experience, I think, for everybody around you, too.
For better or for worse, I'm never at a lack for words. And right now, I'm always at a lack for words. It's very odd. And I've had time periods before where, like, I felt like my throat chakra was closed, right? And that was me feeling like I didn't have permission to say something, usually. But right now, I don't feel a lack of permission. It's not like the outside world. Like, there have been time periods where I'm like, oh, people won't like what I have to say. And so I don't say something. And then because I'm favoring my third function, extroverted feeling or harmony. And so I hand over authority to that and think, well, I can't say that because it'll be too offensive. I've experienced that many times. And then I just have to push through and, nut up and basically go into my auxiliary co-pilot function of introverted thinking and do what I need to do anyway. But this is a very different beast. This isn't me lacking permission. This is me grasping for articulation.
Yeah.
And I've never been so sympathetic to people who use introverted feeling before.
Yeah. Well, and I think it is a grasp for articulation if you have introverted feeling, FI. We call it authenticity, personality hacker sometimes. And I think that you going through this in the personal experience you might share today on the show, yes, it's personal to you. But introverted feeling also knows something that's super deeply personal often has a lot of universal principles to it. It has a lot of universal appeal because we all go through very personal, difficult challenges. And at the time of this recording, there is we're recording this in the middle of a pandemic still, and a lot of turmoil in the world, both politically and socially and culturally and environmentally, potentially economically, for a lot of people. And I don't think you're alone in some of the challenges you're facing. Now, they're unique to you, Antonia, but you listening, you might also have a quote-unquote dark night of the soul happening for you. You might be going through an experience that's challenging, that's deeply personal. It's almost hard to talk about because no one else really understands. It's so unique to you.
I have seen that, or people who I would call sort of emotional pillars, people who a lot of people lean on, especially people with audiences, just have to admit publicly, I'm going through a depression right now, or the summer's been one of the hardest summers ever. And I do think that there's definitely something in the air. Like there's a spirit in the air that is, physically and metaphorically choking. We're all the way out here on the East Coast of the United States. We're actually experiencing darkness because of the fires clear out on the West Coast. Like that's how far it's traveled, And so physically, there's like a choking feeling in the air, like in the literal air, and then metaphorically, there's a feeling of there's a choking feeling. And I think it's a rough time. I think a lot of people are having a rough time. And not that I'm going to be able to speak for them because I'm experiencing something that's very spiritual. And I think other people are experiencing depressions that are very logistical and or maybe possibly spiritual too. But I do know that there's a series of things that I have been clinging to in order to help guide myself through this path, because I think the toughest thing about what I've been experiencing over the last month or so is that there is no light at the end of the tunnel right now. Like almost always, it doesn't matter how dark things have gotten for me, there's always a light at the end of the tunnel to navigate towards. And this is the first time that I don't see the light. And so that whole concept of like the way out is through when there's no even like a pinprick of light at the end of it, well, how do you go through when you're not sure what you're navigating towards? And so it feels very much like just sort of grasping, holding my hands out and hoping that I run into something that will give me some sort of guidance to what's on the other side. And so I've had to find guidance. And one bad thing about the modern age is that we are in information and content overload. Like there's way too much content out there to consume. And it shocks the system, really. But what's nice is that there's literally content for every problem that you could possibly have. And you just have to know how to search for it. And so the phrase dark night of the soul has become something that I'm searching over and over and over again. And I found some really nice resources, all of whom I'm going to forget, by the way, like who said them and where I found them, unfortunately. So I'm going to have to do my best to tag that and maybe have it in the show notes so that I can give credit where credit is due, honestly. But there have been a couple different things that have been extremely helpful to me. And if you're going through something similar to me, if you're going through a depression that's been created by the logistics of this year, this may not be as helpful, but it might be. And if you're going through something that has a little bit more of a metaphysical tone to it, you're feeling down and low and depressed and you're not even sure why, because your life circumstances, you're actually getting through the current circumstances fairly well and you're still feeling low. This might be more helpful. And again, I don't actually have the conceit to believe that what I'm going through is interesting to anybody else. But I am starting to learn that that just being willing to admit, particularly if you're somebody that other people look to and admire in any way, and I think that as somebody who has had my share of people say that they are looking to me in some capacity, I think it's really important that people in this position articulate that things are not always rosy. And in fact, most of the things that, like when I look at the people that I admire, most of the things I admire about them is how they got through tough times and how they've overcome and transcended. And if we are reluctant to talk about the challenges that we experience, then we can't model what it looks like to get to the other side of something. And we're not really humanized in that way. Like we're buying into our own bullshit that we're larger than life, or, like everything just comes easy. Of course it does not. And no matter what you're experiencing, if you're experiencing a down time, maybe just knowing that it's struck everyone potentially, right? I mean, I know some people who are going through this time period and just loving it. The epidemic has given them so much space to just be with themselves, which is awesome. And other people are really feeling sort of all that psychic energy, because there's a lot of low vibration energy out there right now. And if you're sensitive to energy, which I have become over time, I didn't used to be sensitive to energy at all, but I have become over time more and more sensitive to energy. And the more sensitive to energy you are, the more you have to figure out the mechanism of knowing how to do energetic self-care. There are disadvantages to being energetically sensitive. Some of the advantages are that you have an insight into what's really happening. And you can sort of understand. It's kind of like once you start eating a better diet, you start to realize how bad foods make you feel. Like you were unsure why you, were bloated all the time or couldn't lose weight or, felt terrible. And then all of a sudden you understand nutrition, and then all of these things solve themselves because you're like, oh, that's the source of all of this stuff. When you become energetically sensitive, it's almost a similar mechanism. You start to realize what was actually impacting you the entire time. You just didn't have an awareness of it. So there's a lot of advantages to being more sensitive in that way, but the disadvantage is you're more sensitive. All of a sudden, you're way more sensitive now and things are impacting you. So then you have to, I've had to create ways to navigate through it, and I've not always been good at it. I'm not great at disciplining myself for things that make me healthy to begin with. And then when it comes to energy, I think I still have not fully accepted how much I'm impacted by the things around me. And that step of acceptance means that I have to create things that allow for better energetic hygiene, if that makes sense.
You talked before on the podcast, I'm sure you've mentioned this, and I know this because you've told me, you've always had this feeling or this sense that you didn't realize how you were impacting the environment around you and how you were affecting people. Like you would move through as an ENTP in the Myers-Briggs system, you'd move through the world doing what you're doing, and you'd be like, wait, that person's mad? Like, why are they mad? Why did I affect them that way? I didn't show up to their party on time, and like, why they didn't need me there, so why are they upset I didn't, like the little incidental things. And what I hear you saying in this as well is now, not only are you become aware that, oh, I can affect the people around me and the environment I'm in. It seems like you're having another awareness, another level up awareness of, oh, and not only can I affect that environment and the people around me, they can affect me maybe without me even knowing it, maybe without me being conscious of it. It's like having a real effect on my life.
Yeah, no, you nailed it. You totally nailed it. I hadn't thought of it in that way, but I think that's dead on accurate. And so there are habits that need to be formed in order to manage all of that. And for those, for the person listening, if that's all very obvious to them, because there are some people where this is all just very obvious. If that's really obvious to them, that this will probably feel very simplistic, very childlike, to not really understand how those energies play out. But it's just something that unfortunately was a less developed part of me. And now I'm really starting to understand it. But again, the thing that recognizes how I'm impacted and how things are making me feel is associated with introverted feeling or authenticity, which is my 7th function. And that's something I'm just never going to be good at. But I can be aware of it, and I can understand it and try to develop ways of approaching things that will help manage that element. But I think in order to not just make it 100% about me, which it's going to be even if I don't want it to be, because that's where I'm at right now. Everything in my world right now is about me. And it's a very odd place to be. That said, I think there's a couple things that even if I don't understand the trail, if that makes sense. Like I can't see the end of the trail. I can't see the outcome. I don't know what it looks like. I was watching a TEDx talk where a doctor, a scientist that studies the mind, a psychologist, and somebody who studies the brain. Again, I don't remember the name of the person, and if I can, I'll put it in the show notes. But she was talking about how, as a clinical psychologist, she was always taught that depression was chemical, or it was like a physical manifestation that needed, like it was a disorder that needed attention through therapy and medication. And she went through her own time period of depression that was associated with not being able to conceive a child. And through her TEDx talk, she discusses how she realized that depression was actually the other side of the door of spiritual awakening. And that while there is some depression that can still be classified in a disordered way that require medication and therapy, while there's still space for that to be a reality, there's also the space and the reality that depression will hit almost every single human being at some point in their life. And a part of it is because depression is, it's your way of finding your own spiritual enlightenment. And she likened it, or she likened the experience that she went through and the helpers that she had, where she realized that depression was on the other side of enlightenment. She called them trail angels. Like, if you're, I think Dan, we've had Dan Dowd on the podcast multiple times talking about his experiences of doing these really long trails, like the Appalachian Trail here in the United States and the Pacific Crest Trail and the Continental Divide. And he talked about this idea of trail angels, which are people who show up when you need them, when you're on this enormously long, treacherous, grueling, demanding hike. People who show up and provide things for you to just help you, to just help you along your path. And she mentioned all of the people who had helped her on her path as trail angels. And so that's what I've started to see, people who say something to me that helps me calibrate in this darkness. And I can't see the end of the trail, but I know this must be a well-worn path because there are trail angels along the way. And so regardless of whether or not this is like sort of a metaphysical, the universe provides these people, or whether or not it's just a metaphor that I have to cling to in order to get through this, there have been a lot of trail angels so far, and I'm starting to see more and more of them. So part of how I'm navigating this dark night of the soul is to be open to and observant for trail angels and the messages they're trying to give me that help me navigate through all of this. And one of the trail angels has to be Beatrice Chestnut and Aranio Paez, who are Enneagram experts that we've just recently had on the podcast. We are doing a 9-day Enneagram program with them. We've done 3 days of it so far, at the time of this recording, and we're going to continue. And to do all 9 types of the Enneagram. And one of the things that they gave to me, and I hope I'm not letting the cat out of the bag, they talk about this in their own programs at times, but it goes much deeper. And I'm going to hit something that's very, very surface of a very deep topic that goes way, 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 way down the rabbit's hole. And I hope they'll forgive me if they hear this and I'm not.
They did talk about it on day 1 of this program. The students that were part of this 9 Enneagram days have heard this.
They did, yeah. So hopefully they're okay with me just sort of giving the highlights. So if you take the Enneagram symbol and disembody it from the 9 different types, you just look at the symbol itself, the circle with the triangle and the, what is it called? The hexagonal line, arrow lines. And you look at the numbers not associated with personality types, but as almost like a map, similar to Joseph Campbell's hero's journey. The map of the hero's journey, quote unquote map, is a circle. And the reason why is because the hero goes through these different phases and inevitably returns at the end. So Joseph Campbell has put his hero's journey onto a circular dynamic. And if you take the Enneagram and look at the symbol disembodied from type, but just as a circle, like a map, the different numbers represent or can represent phases of a person's development. And at the top of the Enneagram is 9, and it's like birth. 9 is like birth, basically. And the first level that a person goes through is unconsciousness. It's being in personality, meaning that the overwhelming majority of people have been given sets of traits and sets of strategies and tactics for getting through the world that they're unaware of. Right? You could call it, I don't know, the Freud's wrestling of the ego and the superego, all this programming that we have to be perfect and all this programming that we have to appear in a certain way. And so we are unconscious to our strategies and our tactics for moving through the world that make it so that we're sort of trapped in our own, in these strategies. I could look at it through pretty much any personality lens or any lens, really. Like I'm an ENTP, and as an ENTP, I ... and have all these different characteristics that I identify with, and this is how I'm going to do things, and this is how it's going to look, and here are my cognitive functions, and if I'm not aware of any of this, I'm just behaving this way, and somebody asks me to define or describe myself, I'm going to describe all of these characteristics, and I'm not going to see anything wrong with that. I'm just going to keep proceeding in this way as my identity, and then be blind to all of the different ways that it boxes me in. Right? This is the biggest argument people have against type, is that type boxes you in. But it's actually not type that boxes people in, it's being in personality that boxes people in. Right? Like being unable to move outside of these definitions or these descriptions, regardless of whether or not you're even aware of them. So that's level 1. And if you are a person whose circumstances encourage them to do growth for whatever reason, whether internal or external circumstances, the second level is making the unconscious conscious. So you start to recognize things like being in personality, that your strategies and tactics have limitations to them, and you don't have to be confined to them. You don't have to be stuck in like the drama triangle and oversimplified way of looking at life, and and why is the hammer not driving in every nail? Well, it's because not everything's a nail. And so you start to get an awareness. And so this level 2 is that awareness. You start to become aware. And I think one of the easiest ways to describe this in terms of like maybe say the type community is people who are obsessed with type, right? They just want to learn everything they can about personality type. And they're still in their strategies. They're still kind of stuck in their type, but they're at least becoming aware of it. And they're at least observing these behaviors and actions. They're at least making the unconscious conscious. Whether or not they do anything about it is the journey of that second level. At the beginning of that second level is consciousness around these things, observation, like going, oh, I'm doing that because I'm an ENTP, or I'm doing that because I'm an INFJ, or whatever. Eventually, towards the end of that second level of turning the unconscious conscious, you start to realize that you actually have some control over this, that there's actually things you can do and you don't have to be confined to being in personality. And then the third level of this map would be what Beatrice and Aranio would call a shock point. And that's usually something that happens to you. It's a life circumstance. I think about like Byron Katie's work. She talks about how she was just like at her lowest point, and all of a sudden she had an awakening. And you hear this a lot. You hear people talk about these moments of shock points where they have a near-death experience, maybe a car accident, or their spouse leaves, or they have a death in the family, or they lose their religion. And there's lots of different shock points. And then that leads them to the fourth level, which is the ability, and I might be breaking off a little bit of what they've said. I'm kind of trying to figure this map out as I think I understand it. And so my recommendation is to go look for more of this information directly from Beatrice and Aranio, because they're the masters of this map. But that fourth level seems to be something that I went through when I left my religion, which is sort of reprogramming the mind, realizing you have power and control over how your mind is wired. Like you're not just making the unconscious conscious, you're now looking at these unconscious neural paths and all of the strategy and tactics and the information that's been shoved into us. And you realize you have some control over the GPS unit, right? You can actually program it yourself. And so that fourth level is about reprogramming yourself. It's like Jack Kornfield's phrase, if you don't set to programming your mind, the world will program it for you. And so that's kind of that time period where you go, okay, I need to program my own mind. I have all the mechanisms there. And then that's when people start to go to like lots of workshops and do a lot of reading and maybe try psychedelics and do all the things that they can to access that deep programming and realize that they're not trapped. They're not trapped in personality. They have a lot of choice. And then a person can go from 4 to 5. And when you look at the Enneagram as a symbol, the space between 4 and 5 in the numbers is the widest divide. And Aranio talked about that being that 4 to 5, a dark night of the soul. And then 5 is when you get to essence. Now, in the Enneagram vernacular, essence is what you actually are. And it's what personality has separated you from. Like as an Enneagram 3, a sexual 3 is my subtype. The tactics and strategies that I've created as a sexual 3 actually get me further away from my essence, because it's trying to manage the discord that I feel when I can't be in essence. And so my suspicion is that I'm actually going through that dark night of the soul. I'm actually traveling from 4 to 5. And when I talk to them, they mention very few people actually go through this. Now, a lot of people go through a dark night of the soul. If you define dark night of the soul as it was originally mentioned which is basically spiritual depression. I think a lot of people go through a dark night of the soul, but I think that there's a specific dark night of the soul that happens in this particular map or way of looking at the Enneagram, which is the spiritual depression that comes from being separated from essence. And I chart my first quote unquote dark night of the soul happened when I was leaving my religion. That was my shock point, my level 3 shock point. And so I spent a lot of time in reprogramming my mind, which is very ENTP of me, which is part of being trapped in personality, right? I was at level 4, quote unquote level 4, if I was. That's my assumption when I map this all out. And yet still doing the things that are very ENTP of me, which is, and if you've been listening to the podcast since its inception in 2014, I go on and on and on about reprogramming your mind, right? Like that's why we provide all these models. We provide all of these models so that people will have a way of detaching from the brainwashing of the world and to set about being able to program their own mind with different mechanisms, different entry points, different on-ramps. We talk about if you don't like this model, then try this model. Like it doesn't really matter which model you choose, just as long as you're choosing one and being deliberate about it. But I didn't know that my essence and identity wasn't my thoughts. I didn't know that. I didn't know that who I am and what I believe are not the same thing. I conflated them. And what I'm realizing right now is that that in order to go to essence, I have to let go of programming as my mechanism to get there. I have to not be in my thoughts. I actually have to let my thoughts go. And I have to go towards identity separated from programming. Identity separated from everything. Like, what is the marrow of my bones? What is my essence? Who am I without thought and maybe even emotion? What am I at the core of who I am? And that is all question marks. It's all question marks.
As a professional articulator, podcaster, certainly isn't convenient for your day job, quote unquote, having to show up to a podcast and be in your thoughts and be articulate and be on with your sharp introverted thinking that you typically come with. Your world is dependent on this. And now you've said, well, I'm going to move away from it. And, you listening, you probably really appreciate Antonia's introverted thinking and thoughts and the way she processes information. And I think I appreciate it. I'm sure you, Antonia, yourself appreciate it about yourself. And it probably feels very untethered and I don't want to put emotions into your heart, but scary, unnerving, a little unsure, uncertain, like that. Those are probably things you struggle with, I'm guessing.
Yeah. I think in a metaphysical way, this is one of the most terrifying things that I've ever gone through. Because before, when I was leaving my religion, I was leaving external mechanisms that I had become very reliant upon to, to create my social life and to create my feeling of safety in the world. And also, it formed my ideas and paradigm. And so I had to let go of that and restructure it. But when I left, I was on, I was able to enter a space that is that I'm naturally wired to take to, which is design my own programming. Like introverted thinking or accuracy takes to mental programming, or at least it can. Like, in my opinion, there's many layers of what cognitive functions do. There's lower capacities and higher capacities. And so it's hard when we're defining these functions because people use them individually and uniquely. Like an ENTP is not going to use their functions the same way that I do, because these functions do many things and have many layers of sophistication and have individual life circumstances that color how you're going to use them, which is why type doesn't define you. It just gives you a description of how you're probably going to be processing things, right? Which is why they're called mental processes. And because I am a person who is wired to use introverted thinking, programming my own mind was something that I took too quickly. So it was terrifying to leave my external safety nets, but I landed at the relatively soft place of talent, right? And the reason why this is so scary for me is because I'm now separating from talent. I'm entering a space that I'm not naturally good at all. So it's like when I lost my external infrastructure, I could always lean on my internal infrastructure. But now I can't lean on my internal infrastructure. Like, it's a completely different space. And there is a lot of crying that comes along with it. It's like, it's scary. It really is. I think the most scary thing is realizing that I don't actually know who I am in my essence. So this map that I'm talking about, that these trail angels gave to me, helps me define why it's so dark, right? It's like there's no light at the end of the tunnel because I'm at the very beginning of the tunnel. I'm going to have to just keep moving on faith to even get to a place where I start to see that light. And I can only have faith that the light will eventually, like I'll eventually stumble across something and I'll find my way out. I have faith because I'm not the first or last person to go through a process like this. But it is scary, and it is undermining of the life we've built. Like, we've built a life around my introverted thinking. So what happens if I'm not doing that a lot? What happens when I'm not able to do introverted thinking, or it's hamstrung? Like, what happens when my voice is wavering and lacks confidence and conviction in what I'm saying? What happens then? Like, do I lose my potency? What happens when I can't lean on my mental prowess to navigate through a situation? I have to instead lean on something as ethereal and ephemeral as essence. I mean, what the fuck is essence? Like, I'm heading towards essence. That doesn't mean anything to me. And yet here I go. And you made a comment where you said I'm choosing to do this. And I think what is so frustrating is I don't feel like I'm choosing this. I feel like I think I told you, hey, I think I'm going to enter a dark night of the soul like a few weeks ago, and instantaneously I was there. If I could have orchestrated this for timing, I definitely would have done this in like 6 months to a year from now. I definitely wouldn't have done it now. This is not a good time to do it. And yet, I don't really think that we always get choices in these kinds of things.
My intuition says that right now, there's a lot of trauma in the world, like we mentioned in this podcast. And people are searching, and a lot of the strategies that we've had as humans are being challenged because of world circumstances. Mm-hmm. Like, the entire world has changed recently, and maybe permanently. We might do things very differently from now on. And I almost wonder if there are, you've been given a gift, and someone else listening right now that might have a very similar experience, you're being given a gift of preparation, because the world, I think, is going to need people that have really gone through the trials and tribulations of that dark night of the soul, because there's a lot of people that aren't doing that. They're having trauma, they're going through tough times, but they're scared and nervous and just trying to make it through the day, and like logistically, and it's traumatizing, and the world's unstable, and there's a lot of fear and anxiety and uncertainty about what's going to happen. How is this all going to play out? Are my kids going to be okay? Is my family going to be all right? Am I going to be okay? And maybe you have an opportunity. You've created some space for yourself, and you have an opportunity here, and you listening might have the same opportunity to go through experience where on the other side you have a sense of yourself that can be a Sherpa, a guide for other people who might enter this space soon after. And I'm encouraged by that, because I think the world is shifting. I think there is this sounds woo, but I think there is a spiritual shift on the horizon. And there's a lot of dark energy in the world, a lot of dense, constricted, fear-based energy that seems to just overtake everything. Even people that have good intention, that want to make good changes, are carrying about it or going about it with a darkness, with a heavy denseness. It's not a light, positive, loving energy. It's often like withholding, constrictive, attacking, violent, destructive. And I think they want good things, but they're caught up in this. And I think it can overwhelm all of us if we're not careful. So I in some ways I think that this is a tough time. Maybe the timing's bad, but you could also look at it, the timing's just right, because right now there's a space for you in some ways. And on the other side of it, maybe that's a way that you can, not that you have to help somebody, but you listening, or Antonia, maybe there's an opportunity here at the end of all this.
One thing I'd like to do actually is turn the conversation from me to you, because you're one of my trail angels right now. And you've figured some stuff out that I think is extremely helpful. But before we do that, I want to mention two things that struck me today. We just, like you mentioned, Joel, we just got off of a call with Dario Nardi in a workshop we've been doing that's called the Magic Diamond method, which is a way of understanding how to integrate all 8 of your functions, including the shadow functions. And it's been really amazing. Dario does incredible work. I think it's easy to just see him as the brain scan guy that will quote unquote legitimize cognitive functions, which may or may not ever happen. But he's a shaman. He really is, and he has done.
Well, he like really is. Like he's studying to be a shaman too, right?
Right, like a Nordic shaman, and he's done so much extraordinary work, and he understands type at a level that it's easy to discount the kind of work he's doing because it has a spiritual tone. And also finally people are weaving in a spiritual tone to Jungian functions, because that's where it started. Dario was talking about how Jung didn't think that he was a mystic. He just took psychology really seriously. But the truth is he totally was a mystic. And we need more mysticism in Myers-Briggs, honestly, or in functions. We do, because that's the thing that we're missing, right? We have the psychological, but we're missing the spiritual. And that needs to be woven in, absolutely. And he said so many things today that just really, like, especially right now because of the shit that I'm going through, like, really struck me. The first one is he was quoting Jung as having said, "The right way to wholeness is made up of fateful detours and wrong turnings." So I'm taking a lot of comfort in that. That was a trail angel moment where Dario said that. I'm like, okay, fateful detours, wrong turnings. I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel, but that's okay, because wholeness is found on the other side of all of these wrong turns. Okay, I can do that. And the other thing that he said, especially since I'm one of the things that I was feeling some anxiety around, is, again, I'm not able to lean on talent right now for what I'm going through. Before, when I left my religion, I was able to lean on talent, which is reprogramming my mind. But this is a whole different ball of wax. And I'm not able to lean on talent. And again, I would argue that a lot of what I'm experiencing right now is 7th function, is introverted feeling or authenticity. Who am I? What is my identity? What means something to me? What is at the center of who and what I am? Which, of course, is a concept that transcends cognitive functions. Obviously, essence is not wrapped up in introverted feeling. Essence is not wrapped up in any function. It's not wrapped up in anything other than just simply essence. So it goes outside of all of these systems. And yet, using sort of the vernacular or the language that I'm used to for all of these years, a lot of what it feels like I'm doing is something that an introverted feeling user might be more talented at. And he made the comment that when you look at these functions and you're integrating them, that 7th and 8th function, you're never going to be, they're always going to be very taxing, right? You're not going to get a lot of ROI trying to develop them. But he mentioned that integration doesn't always mean developing. It can mean giving space for something to happen. And I thought that was so dead on. Well, I mean, I hope it's dead on because I'm clinging to it like crazy. But yeah, I'm in a space where I don't feel any talent is going to supplement this journey. It's just a journey of giving space for something to happen. And I took comfort in the idea that that is also integration. So yeah, this is a tough path, and I have a lot of sympathy for anybody else who's going through something similar, regardless of why. Right? Like maybe you're on a journey like I am, and you're realizing that you need to go to the next level, and the next level is tough. It's like a really tough climb. Or you're just going through general depression, right? The world is in an agitated state, right? It just feels like, to me, it feels like tectonic plates are smashing against each other all over the place. And everything is very rumbly and unsettling. And maybe that's just really striking you. But no matter what it is, yeah, I hope you are able to find your trail angels that guide you through the path. And I hope Joel might be one of those trail angels, because Joel, you figured stuff out about energy as a person who uses introverted feeling. You've learned some things about energetic hygiene that while I'm going through one of the lowest time periods in my life, I have seen you just absolutely level up. Like right now, you have leveled up like crazy. And I was wondering if you'd be willing to share some of the things that you do that keep you in a space where it feels like, I know that this is not true, but it feels like you are untouchable right now. Like you're just in a good space no matter what.
Talk about pressure. Okay. First of all, thank you for that, because it doesn't always feel like untouchable. I would say a quick comment to what you're saying is you are able to record right now because you, like, if you were in our household for the last few days, you would see Antonia having a really tough time, like a really tough time. And one of the things I think that led you to be able to sit down and record right now is because we just did a 4-hour workshop with Dr. Nardi, and you were live on camera and you were connecting with people. And the key thing here is you were taking action. You were doing something. And I just read this amazing book by Chuck Palahniuk, the guy who wrote Fight Club and Survivor and a couple other books. And he's writing about how to write, right? How to like be an author, how to write. And he's got this great phrase that just rattles in my brain constantly is action creates its own authority. And like intuitively, I know what that means. And I keep trying to find a good way to articulate it. But there's something about doing something that even if you're in the middle of a dark night of the soul, or even if you're in the worst place you've ever been, you listening, by taking action, you are opening up some kind of energy channel for yourself, even if it's a small action. And I think that that's a really key thing to remember is in our time period right now, the time of this recording, it can be challenging to take action. Many of us, there's nowhere to go. We're stuck at home. We're prevented from engaging with other people. We're on Zoom calls or internet calls, video calls all the time. That's our only human interaction often, or we're stuck with the same group of people over and over again because we don't have a lot of cross-pollination. And so action can be tough, especially right now. And I would say that the biggest, like if you take anything away from this conversation between us and you're struggling, action cuts through all of that quickly. And it doesn't fix it all, but it certainly gives you a little bit, like it might raise you from a 10% level to a 30% level so you can function a little better. And even if you have to force yourself into action or have somebody force you into it, I think that's a really key element. And the other piece, I think, is just that we are so good in our culture, in our world, of developing our control muscles. Like we have gotten really good at developing control muscles for ourselves. And we talk a lot about that, even here on this podcast. Learn how to control your boundaries. Learn how to control your mind. Learn how to program, what Antonia was talking about earlier, program yourself. And there's also an idea, though, of learning how to exercise our release muscles. Those aren't as easy to work with, because the last time we released things, we weren't really developed very well, right? If we have never, like, if we had to work hard to develop our control muscles and build the boundaries and build the skill and build all those things, that took a lot of effort. And now it's counterintuitive to learn how to release and let go of things. And it feels like if we do, we'll get harmed in the process. And so the thing, you talk about leveling up. Well, what I'm really working on right now is exercising my release muscles. I'm learning how to let go a lot and release. And it's unnerving in its own way, because it's like, well, if I let go of this, I'm not in charge, I'm not in control, I'm not affecting change. And that's hard won. Like, my life up till now has been me working really hard to be in control of my life. And now the universe seems to be asking me to release that. And that's a really challenging muscle to learn how to do, probably, because you don't want just stuff to fly out of your hands, right? Your release muscle is just gently putting it down on the table. There's some finesse here. There's some nuance here. There's some exercise that has to be done. It doesn't just happen. You don't just release and let go easily. You have to practice, and it's a skill you develop like anything else, but it's a counterintuitive skill. And I don't think in our culture we're typically talked about, or we typically talk about it this way. In fact, we amp up the other side, is you have to go out and vote for this and do this and protest this and control this and get more and more. And it's just constricting. We're tightening and tightening our grip on everything really tight. And our knuckles turn white, and we're stressed out, and our shoulders are tight, metaphorically and literally, and we're overwhelmed by it. And I think that exercise of those release muscles is so powerful.
I think a practical example of this is that in the past, you've been a major motivating factor in making sure the podcast gets out, and particularly on time. If we're late with the podcast, assume I'm the reason why, because Joel will never be late. You would never be late with the podcast. And so it's always me that, like, I can't think of anything, or give me a minute, or I've got other things going on, or whatever. And since I've been going through what I've been going through, you've really let go. You're like, well, we'll record when we can record. Like, when you're ready, let me know. And you've been you've let go of the tenseness around it, which I think is the only reason why I'm able to do it right now. Right? The fact that you've been responsive and you're like, yep, as soon as you're ready, we'll do it. I think that if I had the pressure of doing the podcast on me, I think I would just sit here and cry, which is what I was doing, actually. I was like, I have to do the podcast, and I'd sit at the microphone and I'd just start crying. So that might not seem like a big thing, but if you look at the rhythm of our business, which of course is how we subsidize our life, and how we pay our employees, and how we pay our affiliates and our partners. Like, the money that comes in through this company is the lifeblood of it, and it's how we get to keep doing this. There is a one-to-one correlation between our podcast coming out on time and our revenue. It's asynchronous, though. Like, if we are late with the podcast a couple times in a row, we lose subscribers on iTunes. It starts dropping off. And we will feel the hit of that financially in the next few months. And so, as the person who has been the champion of making sure that Personality Hacker is thriving, not just existing, but also thriving, and making sure that we're able to cover, we cover the livelihoods of multiple people. In order to do that, you have always been very good at making sure that we're on time with the podcast, or at least really driving towards that. And the idea that you've let go of that and released it means that there's big implications to that. It's not a little thing. It's not like, oh, well, they're late with the podcast. The podcast arguably is one of the most important things that we do to keep our business alive and keep people able to cover their rent, right? Not just us, but like other people cover their rent through the proceeds that come through Personality Hacker. And so it's not a little thing to release that. It's not a little thing. It's a big thing. And it's been incredibly admirable that you've learned to go from controlling that to releasing it. And I hope the universe doesn't punish us too much for me being in a space where I couldn't really podcast. But man, I have never felt so supported in my entire life as I do by you, which if you, the listener, can get a spouse or a partner or just somebody who's an intimate in your life, be as supportive to you as Joel is to me, then you have absolutely lucked out. Like the universe gave you a golden ticket, because I've felt so supported. And also, I know that you're leveling up. This is not usual. And it's entirely possible that one of the reasons why you've leveled up is because I'm so out of commission that you don't have an option not to.
Probably. There's probably some of that. I think as an Enneagram 6, I forget who I was telling this recently too, but I tend to perform better when the actual crisis hits than an anticipated crisis. Not that this is a crisis, but when troubles...
It's not a crisis.
Yeah, when troubles come into my life, I actually seem to deal better than when I'm anticipating troubles coming into my life, right? That's when I get anxious and it's harder when I'm expecting them than when they actually are there. And I usually rise to the occasion when they're there. I would say the final thing I just mentioned is, if you're somebody that wants to think in terms of stabilizing here, I'm not sure what the frame was in this. I was talking about two things. I lost my track of my introverted thinking.
The frame is that I'm a mess and you're doing beautifully. So tell people how you're doing it.
Release muscles was the one suggestion. Letting go of things. Another piece here too is really getting clear on what I want. Not on what I want and how it has to happen, but what I want. And not, again, on the lower level, like I want a podcast out this week. Well, that's the how of what I want. Yeah, that's what I want on a lower level. But what I really want is I want a platform and an ability for us and the people we work with to affect change in other people's lives. That's what I want. And if the podcast is incapable of serving that want, then that's just the tool to get there. And being really clear on the what you want. And I look around the world right now, a lot of people don't know what they want. They're looking to their right and their left. And what they want is they want to feel included and feel significant. And they're just latching on to whatever movement or whatever the thing is, whatever their political, cultural persuasion is, and they're jumping on a bandwagon, again, all across all the spectrum, and they're just acting, assuming that that's like really what they want. But what they're really after is significance, contribution, community. These are the things they really want. Meaning, right? Meaning for their life, meaning and purpose. And they're more in love with the mechanism to get the meaning and purpose than going toward the meaning and purpose in the first place. And I think that's a real big shift I've personally had a lot right now and it's helped me not be snarky on Twitter and not be, upset about stuff I see, because I'm really clear on where I'm going and what I'm after. And it doesn't matter how I get there, and it cuts through. It's almost like a fog of all this activity, and I just pop my head up and I can clearly see what I want in front of me, and it helps me make much better decisions, and I'm much more chill. And that plays in with that whole release muscle. I can let go because I have a lot of clarity now. And the clarity came, I think, from a lot of the world's trauma. Like, it's like, I can't just be at a whim of everybody's activity. What is it that I am looking toward? And I think that's really a big key in this too. And I think that I'm seeing some people come through this as well in the same fashion.
You also have really upped your self-care game. And before, I think you did a lot of relying on my FE, my extroverted feeling 10-year-old tertiary function.
Outsource it, man. Why do it for yourself?
That's right. You did a lot of outsourcing to me to help you figure out your self-care. And one of the gifts you've given to me is developing your extroverted feeling harmony function, which is the sixth function. And if you go check out Dario Nardi's work, the most recent book that he's published is called The Magic Diamond. Go check it out. It's fantastic. He talks about the importance of developing that sixth function. And if you're unfamiliar with what the sixth function is or the shadow functions, I mean, it's all explained in the book. And I'm not even going to tell you, go buy his book. Go do it right now and go support his work because he's amazing. So Joel's sixth function is extroverted feeling or harmony. And we oftentimes have an ick factor around our sixth function. There's something about it that just kind of is a turnoff to us. And yet it's leveraged for development and growth. And I've noticed that as my sixth function is extroverted thinking or effectiveness. But one of the things that you've done, Joel, is you've become far more aware of getting your own needs met, being aware of them in order to keep an emotional equilibrium going. And you've stopped outsourcing that piece, which has been, I mean, it's just been so helpful. And I continue to outsource my extroverted thinking to you. But maybe when I get through this dark night of the soul on the other side, you'll see a transformed me. But that self-care has been awesome. So you've been lifting how many times a week now?
You mean like exercising?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Like 3 times a week.
Yeah. So you've been like lifting weights 3 times a week, and you've been making sure that you're eating at regular intervals, high quality foods, and getting good sleep, which we talk about a lot, but it's easy to let those things go. But you've been very disciplined about it. But I think the thing that you've really upped your game around is your energy platforms. Like if you're starting to feel infected or attacked by low vibration energy, you come in and you do an energy platform, which includes meditation. It includes energy release. And I mean, I remember one day when we were having a particularly tough time. I was like maybe at 5 or 10%. I was in a terrible space. I think you must have done 5 40-minute energy platforms that day. Like you just kept coming in and doing energy platforms. You're like, I'm not going to let this thing take me down. And so you've just been really rigorous about your energetic hygiene. And that's, I mean, again, I'm getting the benefit of it, even though I'm in this really dark place. So I think all of that has been amazing. To the listener that might be less in Joel's space and more in my space, right? Like, I mean, if you're in a decent space and you don't want to have all of this impact you and affect you, go the Joel route. If you're like me and you're already forked, right? You're already here. There are 3 things that I keep hearing over and over that are the ways to deal with something like this, a dark night of the soul, if you're going through a spiritual depression or any sort of depression. And those 3 things are, 1, acceptance. Like we have to accept that this is where we're at. I just was fighting it for the longest time because I didn't want to be I thought I was a loser. I thought I was being a total loser. And there's still a part of me that's like resisting that this is where I'm at. I'm like, well, maybe I shouldn't, because I'm thinking about actually going and spending some time by myself, and letting you, Joel, watch Piper and just having some time to myself.
Give me all the crap to do.
Yeah, basically, effectively.
Cyber School Piper, run the business. I just figure the podcast on your own. I'm out of here.
Right, and the idea of accepting that that's what I'm about to do to you is a hard thing to accept because I've never felt like a bigger loser in my life. I've never felt like a pile of crap in this relationship. Honestly, it makes me feel like shit. And also, like I can't do anything. Like I walk up to a microphone and I have this wavery voice. I have to accept that this is where I'm at. So the first one is acceptance, and the second one is surrender. Surrender meaning, like you said, it's a release mechanism. Like I need to surrender to this process because it's happening to me. It just is. So I can either fight it and have it go on longer, or I can surrender to the process and maybe come out the other side, with the lessons that I was supposed to take. And the third one is self-care. That this is a time period of learning rigorous self-care. And self-care isn't bubble baths and wine. Self-care is recognizing that I'm in a tough space right now, and it's going to need a lot of spiritual medicine. Self-care isn't just a spa treatment. Self-care is like maybe I need to really understand my process, and I need to really understand what's happening here, and I need to go be with myself and do the thing that whatever my essence requires. And not hand myself over to the depression, but rather navigate through this space. Do the things that are spiritually rewarding. Work on my hygiene, my spiritual, mental, and energetic hygiene. So if you're in this space, you're not alone. Maybe I'm alone. Maybe nobody else is in the space with me. But I have a feeling that I'm not the only one right now. And I think what's probably going to happen for future podcasts is we might have to get creative on how we do this if I'm unable to perform. Right now is a rare moment when I'm able to talk about it, and obviously all I can do is talk about myself, which is going to get real boring real quick. So we might have to do other things that are interesting for the podcast for a little while. And also we'll navigate through this, and hopefully when I come out the other side, which I'm assuming I won't get trapped here forever. Maybe I'll have some things of value to talk about. That's the thing that I'm hoping for.
Yeah. Ooh, what an intense show, huh? So if you're still with us and you've been listening along, I'm sure things have been surfacing for you as you're listening along. And we'd love to hear from you. If you want to come over to personalityhacker.com directly below this show, feel free to ask a question, offer a comment, share your story. Your story is important because each of us have the story we're living. We're a character in our own world and our own narrative structures, and our stories really illustrate a lot what's going on for us beyond just the articulation of it. It's a whole narrative that we come with. So I think your story of what's coming up for you, maybe where you're at in your life, and what Antonia is talking about that resonates with you, it'd be really interesting to hear that. And I think other people in the community, the other listeners, other audience members would really benefit from your story too. So come over to personalityhacker.com. Directly below this podcast, make your voice heard.
I've done this a million times, so I can probably get through this outro just on sheer muscle memory. If you enjoyed this podcast, even though I talked about myself the entire time, you can subscribe to us on iTunes and various Android platforms. If you leave us a rating and review on iTunes, don't leave us a rating and review right now. Just don't even worry about that. It's not going to be a good one, so don't worry about it. Don't do one. We have a book. It would be awesome if you bought it. It's called Personality Hacker. And of course, we have a suite of programs that are personal growth oriented and designed to help you understand yourself and how to navigate through this world. It helps make the unconscious conscious. So we highly recommend going and checking them out.
Yeah. My name is Joel Mark Witt.
And I'm Antonia Dodge.
And we're going to talk with you on the next Personality Hacker podcast.